Hi folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness. Today I'm bringing you another review of Doctor Who Season 12 with Episode 5, Fugitive of the Judoon. And I'm really stunned by this episode. It's a very difficult one to review given everything that happens in it and the implications for both the past and the future of the show. All I can say to begin with is that writers Vinny Patel and Chris Chibnall must have had the crack pipes out and puffing away whilst penning this story, because there's so many what the fuck moments, and not really good ones either, but I'll come to these in a bit. Let's begin with a brief overview of the plot. There isn't much to tell here, as the general plot is wafer thin. We're introduced to Ruth and Lee Clayton, a seemingly ordinary couple with a few hints that there may be something mysterious about them. A Judoon platoon arrive on Earth in the city of Gloucester in the UK, and they are pursuing a fugitive. The Doctor and the fam arrive in Gloucester to investigate and encounter Ruth and Lee, whom the Judoon have now cornered in their flat. As the Doctor and the fam try to help them escape, the fam are beamed away one by one onto a spaceship being piloted by Captain Jack Harkness. Jack says he's trying to contact the Doctor but can't get a lock on her, hence he's beaming up the fam instead. Jack wants them to give a message to the Doctor about her impending meeting with a lone Cyberman. The Doctor is now left to help Lee and Ruth alone. The Judoon's contractor, Commander Gat, appears and kills Lee. Gat recognises him as an associate of the fugitive that they are pursuing. Captain Jack returns the fam to Gloucester, but the Doctor and Ruth have now fled from Gloucester. Prompted by a text message sent from Lee before he died, they head to Ruth's childhood home, a lighthouse by the sea. Outside the house, the Doctor finds a grave with a police box-style TARDIS buried beneath it. In the lighthouse, Ruth breaks an alarm on the wall which releases energy that engulfs her. The energy triggers her memory and she reveals to the Doctor that she is, dun dun dun, also the Doctor. Both don't recognise each other as incarnations of the Doctor. They get into Ruth's TARDIS and they arrive on the Judoon ship where they confront Gat. Gat reveals she's a Time Lord with orders to pursue and capture Ruth. The Doctor links minds with Gat and shows her Gallifrey's destruction in an attempt to bargain with Gat. She doesn't believe it. A fight ensues and Ruth seemingly shoots Gat dead. This and their distance from Earth on the Judoon ship terminates the contract with the Judoon, and the Doctor and Ruth leave in the latter's TARDIS. Ruth drops the Doctor off with her fam in Gloucester and departs. The fam delivers Captain Jack's message to the Doctor about the lone Cyberman, and the episode ends about there. And before I dive into the implications of this episode, I just want to rattle through some observations that I made whilst watching this episode. Let's begin with the usual dose of identity politics that the BBC now feel compelled to hammer into all of their media content. As usual, we have more white man bad or white man moron undercurrents. Examples include the weedy Alan, the coffee owner, who tells Ruth there's something dodgy about Lee and that she can do better. I interpreted this as him referring to himself as an example of somebody better. But all the setup is totally irrelevant because he gets disintegrated by the Judoon soon after this. Then there's Lee himself, who it's implied is indeed a bit of a shady character, although we never really find out why, because he's also disintegrated by the Judoon soon after. Then there's Graham, who yet again this season is being written like a clumsy village idiot with no intelligence whatsoever. Then there's a return of Captain Jack, John Barrowman's character from both Torchwood and earlier seasons of Doctor Who. Now ordinarily this would really be a wow moment and of course a celebration amongst those of us who despair at the direction that Chibnall era Doctor Who has taken recently. However, despite being a genuine surprise moment wherein he appears, the cameo almost appears like a pantomime version of the character, with Barrowman racing through and stumbling all over his lines. He's prancing around like he's on speed. I put that down to a mixture of two things: Barrowman's overexcitement at returning to the role, something that he's been lobbying for ever since his last on-screen appearance, and the shonky script and direction of this episode. I know a number of people observed that Captain Jack might have escaped the white male bashing because both the actor and the character aligns with the BBC's diversity strategy. But unfortunately, there's a major problem with Captain Jack that doesn't benefit the current era of Doctor Who. Jack's an incredibly popular character with fans. He's a heavy reminder of an era of Doctor Who that was, to put it bluntly, far, far superior to what we have now. So bigging up Captain Jack reminds everybody of this fact, and it's not something that the BBC want people to be reminded of, frankly. Solution: dumb down and subtly undermine the character in order to lessen any reminders of the good era of the show that came before it. In my opinion, Jack's return is far more than just a ratings grab here. There is something very subtle going on. It's about undermining the past of the show, as I said before, but something that we get much more of later in this episode, but more on that in a minute. On the flip side of the white male bashing propaganda, we have more female affirmation and superiority of women over men. Hardly a theme that promotes equality, I know, but this is the BBC we're dealing with here. First off, we have Ruth, who seems to be the only so-called well-rounded strong role character amongst those characters initially introduced. Next we have the Judoon platoon, which is led by our first glimpse of a female Judoon in Doctor Who. At one point the Doctor also asserts that she can reason with the Judoon leader by talking to her, as she puts it, woman to woman. Then there's Gat, presumably written as another example of a strong female character, but actually ends up coming off as little more than a ruthless psychopathic caricature. We also have several lines of dialogue and interaction worth noting. Captain Jack beams Graham aboard his ship, and he initially thinks that Graham's the Doctor. Now, this is not the first time that we've had a character mistake Graham for the Doctor this season, and it seems to be a dig on the part of the producers at those people who take issue with Jodie Whittaker's portrayal of the Doctor. We also have when Ryan says, "You are the Doctor," Graham reiterates "the best person," presumably a subtle reminder of reinforcement to the viewers. When the Doctor, Ruth and Gat appear on the Judoon ship, we have some rather perplexing interactions. Gat's very flippant towards the Doctor, calling her a little woman. This does give Dr. Jodie a chance to retort. She shouts "little," then mumbers "biting my tongue." Speaking of portrayals of the Doctor in a positive manner, what's with all this moody, stroppy behaviour of the character in the story? I know the illusion that is she's preoccupied with what the Master told her and what happened to Gallifrey, but still, we've had other scenarios like this in the other eras of the show where previous Doctors could have, but didn't, react in this way. Writing the role, or more appropriately, portraying the role like this, isn't exactly going to endear people to the character, in my opinion. The Doctor also takes a bashing in this episode from Dr. Ruth when she insults some of her choices of actions and the style of her clothing. This is quickly resolved soon after when Dr. Ruth says to Dr. Jodie, "I don't know why I'm trusting you," and the Doctor replies, "I've got one of those faces." Well, indeed, she has got one of those faces, just not the one that she was thinking of. Before I dive into the Dr. Ruth part of the plot, I also want to point out another subtle dig at Russia on the part of the BBC, one of many this season, as you'll have seen in some of my other reviews. In this story, the Doctor lays into the Judoon for their planned use of an energy weapon that will, if used, irradiate a sizable portion of the inhabitants of Gloucester city centre. Watching this, I was immediately recalling the so-called Novichok nerve agent incident that took place in Salisbury in March 2018, where, as the official story goes, parts of the surrounding area were cordoned off to prevent locals from coming to further harm. And I clearly recognise the allusion in this episode, but there will be some people out there who might say I'm just reaching here. However, it seems that my interpretation of this particular in-plot message has now been confirmed. Fortunately, because my reviews of this season are so woefully behind, I've already watched episode 7 of season 12, the episode entitled "Can You Hear Me?" before uploading this video, and in that episode Yaz and her sister discuss the events that took place in this episode in Fugitive of the Judoon in Gloucester, and her sister tells Yaz that the official mainstream media version of those events were that the Russians were to blame. So we've got confirmation that this is indeed what the writers were alluding to in Fugitive of the Judoon. But anyway, let's move on to the big whammy of this episode, the reveal that Ruth is also the Doctor. There's been a huge amount of speculation on the internet about where Dr. Ruth fits into the chronology of the Doctor. Initially, a number of fans speculated that this incarnation of the Doctor was a parallel universe or alternate reality version of the character, but something that prompted many fans to breathe a huge sigh of relief given the implications this incarnation has. However, a few days after the episode aired, showrunner and co-writer Chris Chibnall went on record as saying that Dr. Ruth was a bona fide Doctor and not an alternative reality incarnation. This again raised questions amongst fans of where she fits into the chronology and continuity. Eagle-eyed fans pondered about the scenes in the classic Doctor Who episode Brain Morbius, which hinted that there'd been other incarnations of the Doctor before William Hartnell's incarnation. And the implication here, therefore, being that additional Doctors shifts the patterns of the regeneration cycles. This can be quasi-verified if we consider Tom Baker's regeneration, with Peter Davidson's incarnation being prompted by a Watcher Time Lord version of himself that's waiting in the wings. It poses the question, was this the start of a new cycle, regeneration cycle? The fans have discussed this because it would potentially allow other Doctors to fit into the continuity. However, we've seen all of the subsequent Doctors regenerate into their follow-up version on screen, admitting the possibility of a shoehorned-in Doctor being created. People often talk about how this is similar to when Stephen Moffat retconned canon in order to fit John Hurt's War Doctor. This was only made possible because, at least up to the point of the 50th anniversary day of the Doctor story, we hadn't seen Paul McGann's Doctor regenerate into Christopher Eccleston's Doctor. In my opinion, drawing these comparisons to the invention of Dr. Ruth is giving the current runners of Doctor Who too much creative and intellectual credibility. At this point, the only way I can see to fit Dr. Ruth and potentially other as yet unseen Doctors into the continuity without destroying it would be perhaps the moment in Twice Upon a Time, immediately after Peter Capaldi's version regenerates into Jodie Whittaker's. In that scene, there's this blinding white flash that shifts the viewer from a fiery TARDIS interior to a dimly lit interior. The scene's just before the moment where Capaldi's ring drops off Whittaker's hand. People have asked the question, could Whittaker have regenerated off-screen and then regenerated into another Whittaker incarnation, somewhat like David Tennant did in The Stolen Earth? and that it's happened at a later stage. There could be the possibility that Dr. Ruth is a future incarnation of the Doctor, and some sort of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff prevents them from recognising each other again. Again, I'm probably giving the writers behind the show too much credit here. What we're facing may be more concerning, however. A good while back, Gary Beekler from the excellent YouTube channel Nerdrotic reported on rumours from inside sources that a big dump of on the continuity of Doctor Who's timeline was impending. And I'm starting to think that the worst fears of dyed-in-the-wool Doctor Who fans may very well be coming to pass. I suspect that past incarnations of the Doctor are going to be erased from existence and replaced by as-yet unseen versions due to the change in the timeline, and that this timeline will essentially become established canon from here on out. Now, the BBC constantly reminds us that Chibnall's always been a huge and lifelong fan of the show. My observation here would be this: if this momentous change to the canon of the show is impending, surely Chibnall, as a fan of that depth, would realise the implications of such a decision. But there's a big proviso here regarding Chibnall being a fan. He's also a media industry writer, producer, and moreover, he works for the BBC in a rather prestigious role. No matter how much of a fan somebody is, some media types place their loyalty front and centre to their jobs and keeping them, and Chibnall seems to be one of those types. But there's also another factor to consider here: the huge ego of mainstream media writers, producers and directors. Those dedicated to their profession operate whilst serving a proverbial golden rule of creatives in the media, coming up with the idea that will immortalise them, in their words, in some manner. And there are rarely scruples amongst mainstream media creatives, so it regularly doesn't matter to these types what they have to do in order to get their proverbial 15 minutes of fame. If it means being hated by huge numbers of people, or totally decimating something that's been long established in order to achieve their dream of being remembered by people, then nothing is sacred to them. I know that is true because I was a jobbing musician for over 15 years. I was the front man of a well-established tribute band to rock legends The Who. Although I absolutely did not agree with the conceit, I know that the majority of musicians follow an age-old adage in order to get fame and notoriety. All publicity is good publicity, even when it's bad publicity. Bands and musicians, they are driven by this compulsion to get noticed. They build a substantial following, then grow and maintain it, and they will figuratively, in some cases literally, sell their proverbial souls in order to achieve this. And it's no different in television and film writing. We've seen this recently with the likes of Alex Kurtzman and his gang with what they've done to the established canon of Star Trek. Rian Johnson did the same thing with Star Wars The Last Jedi. It doesn't matter to them how much fans hate what's been done to the likes of Mr. Spock or Luke Skywalker, or how much it shits all over the continuity and legacy of a franchise, or even if their decisions prompt financial losses in the companies they work for. In their minds, their driving motivation for what they're doing is to be remembered, whether that be for better or for worse. But that said, you might think that this is what is exclusively driving these bizarre creative decisions, or even that in highlighting this, I'm somehow excusing these media types and letting them off the proverbial hook. But I'm not. I cannot see any justifiable excuse for these types of decisions, but perhaps that's because I consider myself to be somebody who's got a bit of integrity and moral code, and I would never be party to that sort of thing anyway. I don't believe that it can ever really be justified. Furthermore, I don't believe that this is the only thing that's going on here in the case of Doctor Who. Having researched the subject evidentially for over 10 years, I know that there are depoliticised and covert agendas at work in the media, and that the media works hand in hand with all manner of elite entities and organisations, and facilitating programmes of propaganda, social engineering, worldview warfare. Some of you might think that this is woo-woo territory, but such machinations in the media, they've long existed. They've been around for about 100 years. There's a wealth of documented evidence, quantifiable evidence, to prove it. One example alone is the CIA's Operation Mockingbird. If you doubt this, please take the time to do some research into the subject rather than simply dismissing the notion out of hand. Now, I don't doubt that the decision to introduce new versions of the Doctor and potentially decanonise the past is part of a deeper agenda in the BBC. The organisation is mandated by government, social engineering think tanks, so-called charitable organisations, the intelligence establishment, the list goes on and on and on. And the likes of Disney and such, they operate on the fronted assumption that these are businesses that are ultimately out to make profit, something which is not technically true, but that's a subject I'll save for another time. The BBC does not need to create such a pretense. The irony is that the BBC sometimes actually uses that argument, that they are a quasi-business and need to be profitable to some degree. But that's actually double talk. It's highly misleading. The BBC is a social engineering mouthpiece for the UK. It's not going anywhere, profitability or not. It's always been what it is, although I will concede that it has only been in the last 20 years or so that its agendas have become so fierce and blatant. With regards to Doctor Who, I predict here that Dr. Ruth is the calm before the proverbial storm. I think we're going to see much more yet. I also think that these creative decisions, if you could call them such, will completely rewrite the established canon and smash the continuity and legacy of the show. Before I finish, I just want to add an addendum to those people out there who might try to throw all manner of isms and ist terminology and labels in my direction. Don't bother. The issue here is about subversive and clandestine political and social agenda-driven motivations that are truly behind the kind of decisions that we witness being made manifest in the likes of an episode like Fugitive of the Judoon. I do not have any problem with the colour of the skin of an actor, what they have between their legs, their life choices, their orientations, their appearance, or anything of that kind. In point of fact, I actually quite enjoyed Jo Martin's portrayal. I found her to be a highlight of the episode. Her acting was good. It was actually far better than Jodie Whittaker's, and I really quite liked her interpretation of the Doctor. And it's ironic that we get this Doctor at this point, because inadvertently Jo Martin's portrayal revealed many of the shortcomings of Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, such as a lack of likability in some cases, conviction, deep emotions at appropriate moments, the things that I've been waiting to see from her acting in the role in the show, vulnerability, the list goes on and on. Why couldn't we have had Jo Martin when a female Doctor was first announced? That's the question I asked myself. Rating this episode is difficult. I've got two separate trains of thought regarding my overall score. If I were to put the larger implications aside, there were things that I liked about the episode, despite the flimsy plot. There was the return of the Judoon, the return of Captain Jack, despite how it turned out, the reveal of both the TARDIS beneath the grave, Dr. Ruth's identity. Then, of course, there's Jo Martin's portrayal in the episode. If I were to score it on that level, I would give it a 4 out of 10. However, I must take into account the staggering implications of potentially rewriting the entire canon of this show from this point forward, if that's what's going to happen. If it was done in a limited capacity or via an alternative timeline route, which it looks like we're not going to get that now, I might have considered that clever, even genius in the better writer's hands. However, I think we can see where all this is probably going to go. And if it does, and then I had to rate the episode under those considerations, I would probably give it a 1 out of 10. The trouble is that things are still playing out at the moment. We're just going to have to wait and see where it all goes. If I'm wrong, I'll eat my proverbial hat, but I have a nagging feeling that there's a big storm on the horizon for Doctor Who, and it won't be one that passes quickly. And that's it for now. I hope you've enjoyed this analysis and review video. If you do, please remember to tell YouTube by hitting the like button, or even share the video about wherever you can. If you like the content of the channel, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon for notification of new content, and I will see you in the next video.